Stonewall Inn was a local gay bar in New York City, and for 6 days, folks clashed. The police and the LGBTQIA protesters really fought one another, and basically a new civil rights movement for the liberation of the LGBTQ community was formed. And it changed our nation, and I would say it even changed the planet in a lot of different ways. The roots of the movement are founded in principles of human rights and civil liberties. And Pride Month, for me, is a reminder that we still have a lot of generational work to do to ensure everyone enjoys the full promise of equity, dignity, protection, and freedom, which in a lot of reason for why MLU exists. And everyone should enjoy it is everyone. And diversity, I think, is part of what makes Maryland so, so great. So today, LGBTQIA movement members join with civil rights members and for equity and justice movements across the country. And right now, I think we're also facing another inflection point where states are becoming more and more restrictive of individual rights, which makes our work in Maryland all the more important. In 2021, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but across the country, we witnessed, for example, on a similar but related topic, the highest numbers of abortion restrictions and reproductive rights restrictions made law in a single year. In 2023, just this year alone, we are seeing state and local legislators that have introduced over 600 laws targeting the LGBTQIA community. We're seeing books being banned because they are written about LGBTQIA families. We also are seeing poems banned about democracy and the bending the arc of justice. And our movements for freedom and justice, for that reason, I think are very intertwined. Transgender youth in over a dozen states have had their medically necessary healthcare banned, as well as more and more women's reproductive rights. And we're seeing the same kind of vitriol, homophobic and transphobic, that is being spewed online, we're also witnessing toxic political attacks on immigrants, on women, on people of color, on religious views, on religious practices, just to name a few. And it's all spilling over into real life, gun violence. We've seen an increase in gun violence across the country, but also in Maryland against Brown and Black communities, but also against the LGBTQIA, religious communities, Jewish communities, Muslim, Hindu, over the last 5 to 10 years. And now we are also seeing the rise of armed hate groups, intimidating people, whether it's at pride marches or drag performances or doctors' offices where hospitals offer care to LGBTQIA youth, or abortion care or reproductive health care. So hate crimes and mass shootings are also on the rise. And I'm raising this because there's so many crazy things going on. And I feel, even though Pride Month is about identity, right, in so many ways, if not the main one, it's also about pride. It's about being proud of who we are as individuals. And right now we're seeing rising gun violence. We're also seeing rising hate crimes. And, Pulse 2016, largest mass shooting in history, 49 people died. That was 6 years ago. Last year, the Club Q in Colorado Springs, another 5 people were killed and 18 injured. And just a couple of weeks ago, weekends actually, Annapolis suffered a mass shooting and 3 Latino men lost their lives, 3 people were injured. All of those families and communities are suffering equally. They're all suffering, they're all picking up the pieces, but they're also wondering, what can we do? How do we prevent this from ever happening again? So on a positive, Maryland has been highly proactive in strengthening its legal system to protect the rights of all people. Many challenges remain. This is big work. More can be done and more must be done, right, to protect all of our communities. And really, just over the last 10 years, we've seen a great movement in terms of non-discrimination protections, for example, for the LGBTQ community and other key protective laws, hate crimes laws as well. But still, how is it that even if we have these protective practices and laws in place, we're still seeing a rise? So today we have two incredible leaders, Delegate Joe Vogel from District 17 in Montgomery County, and Delegate Ashanti Martínez, District 22 from Prince George's County. They're amazing. In their short time in the State House, they've earned important seats on committees, the Health and Government Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee. I believe, Delegate Martinez is on Health and Government and Delegate Vogel is on Ways and Means. They're both young, they come from immigrant families, and they're both fighting for justice, equality, and things they're passionate about, mental health and a healthy environment. So they stand up for all of those and our communities who cannot represent themselves. And so welcome. Bienvenidos. I will start with a personal question first. Tell us about yourselves. You both have these incredible stories. You both come from immigrant families. You've taken on fearlessly these fights for big things, for people's rights. And tell us a little bit about your personal journeys. Let's start with you, Delegate Vogel.
Well, buen día a todos. It is such an honor to join you all today. It's a little early, so I apologize for my sweatshirt. And I got to tell you, when I got up this morning, I was already excited to be coming on here, but I got even more excited when I realized I'd be joining my friend Delegate Ashanti Martínez, who is a partner in crime. I shouldn't say crime, but he's a partner in action in the legislature. And so many of you who I've gotten to know over the course of this work, and it really is exciting. I'm someone that brings a lot of different identities with me to the work that I do, and so often it feels like not that they're in conflict with each other, but that they're a bit separate, right? In different communities that I have, in addition to my constituents back here in Gaithersburg and Rockville, different communities that I have the responsibility of really elevating our voices and making sure that we're all represented. So it is really, really special for me when we have an opportunity to bring those identities and those communities together in settings like this, right? Where we are, this month is not only Pride Month, celebrating the LGBTQ plus community, it's also Immigrant Heritage Month. Right. So, and it's also this is an opportunity for us to recognize the important role of LGBTQ plus Latinos in our politics, in our government, and the intersection of those two identities and those two communities. I'll quickly touch on my story. My family immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old from Uruguay. I recently learned that I am the first Uruguayan American state legislator, which is pretty exciting, but for a country of 3 million people, probably not too surprising. And I first got involved in politics here in my community. Really, one of the first moments that led me to do this work was watching what happened. I was young. I was in high school at the time, watching what happened at Sandy Hook Elementary School. That propelled me to say, hey, look, if nothing is changing after these kids are gunned down in their schools, we have to do something about it. So I went to work for a candidate here who had a strong gun violence prevention platform. That led me to continue working in politics and government. I worked for Hillary Clinton when she was running for president, joined her advance team, traveled across the country. And what's actually super interesting about that story is that I wasn't able to vote in that election because I actually became a US citizen 1 week after that presidential election. And that was a moment for me when I said, wow, look, all of these challenges that are happening in my country, in this new country that I'm just becoming a citizen of, I really feel like I have an obligation to fight for its future. So I started working on different causes. I worked with March for Our Lives, worked with NARAL to fight back against Trump's Supreme Court nominations, worked for Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey for a few years. And then during COVID, really got involved with organizations here on the front lines doing incredible work on everything from access to nutritious food, to making sure that we addressed the childcare crisis in our state, started a nonprofit with some of my friends and former classmates to help children of essential workers stay on track in school during the pandemic, recognizing that they wouldn't have the same resources as other families because their parents were at work while they were having to be on virtual school. And then, I saw a need in my community to serve in our legislature, and I ran for delegate, was successful in that race, and have been in the legislature working on issues from mental health care to addressing the rise in hate crimes that we're seeing, the opioid overdose epidemic, the fentanyl epidemic in particular, which is having a devastating impact on everyone in our state, but in particular, really having a devastating impact in the Latino community as of recently. So I'm sure we'll get into it more, but I want to turn it over to my friend, Delegate Ashanti Martínez.
Well, thank you so much, Delegate Vogel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Delegate Ashanti Martínez. I have the honor and pleasure of serving Maryland's 22nd Legislative District, which is in the heart of northern Prince George's County. So communities and neighborhoods of Hyattsville, Lanham, New Carrollton, Riverdale, Berwyn Heights, Edmonston. There's 7 municipalities in total, 140,000 folks that I get to represent every single day in the Maryland General Assembly. I'm really honored to be back with you all. I've previously been on this particular meeting, but at that time I was wearing my CASA hat, being a research and policy analyst there. I've now moved on. I now work for the county council outside of the legislature, doing amazing work promoting the People's Council and their agenda. I was appointed to the legislature, I think it's 118 days ago, if we do the math. It was about 6 months after my second race for this particular seat. I jumped in and really got involved in the 22nd Legislative District around my 21st birthday when I launched my campaign. And have been consistently, fighting for and advocating for Latinos in our community. I'm actually the first Latino to represent my district, the 22nd district, in the Maryland General Assembly. And I'm also the first openly gay member of the Prince George's County delegation to Annapolis. And so we are continuing to sweep up glass off the floor as we continue to shatter ceilings. My history and what I've been able to do all starts from being a young Democrat, being 14 in high school and organizing my peers to register to vote. Here in Maryland, you can register at 16 to vote. And when I found that out, I was just so encouraged to get any and everybody that could register to vote. Joined the Young Democrats, did some amazing organizing work with young people on local campaigns, and then went on to work as an intern on Capitol Hill. Worked with some Maryland heroes like Steny Hoyer when he was minority leader in the 115th Congress. I also had the pleasure of having my first ever internship with Elijah Cummings. Right before I went to Howard University, I was in his office for a summer and got to really see what service leadership looks like. Something that Congressman Cummings used to talk about a lot, and something that I always brought to heart was take your pain into your passion and make your passion into your purpose. And that's really how I try to see policy and move forward within our communities. After the experiences on Capitol Hill, I actually worked on the congressional campaign for Delegate Jocelyn Peña-Melanick. The 4th congressional seat came open. I saw her at a community event. I said, I want to work for you. She said, I want you to work for me. And we started building this relationship to where now, she is my committee chair, but she's also like my political mom. I call her, she's like, who are you dating? Are you working out? What's going on with this? And that's just like, my girl. And so relationships, I think, have been really the currency of my career, have been the currency of this business, really, and how I've been able to be on the Zoom with you guys. So, Veronica, cool to see you. Dr. Lemus, thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited for this conversation and seeing so many familiar faces here today.
Well, thank you. I just can't get over how young you are. I'm just going to be quiet now. But let's start on a celebratory note. There's a couple of things I want to highlight about what's recently happened, but also where Maryland has been a leader, right? And the state of Maryland became the first state in 2012 to establish by vote of the state legislature that same-sex couples are entitled to the same legal and civil benefits of marriage as heterosexual couples. That doesn't seem like very long ago. But then this month, we've seen Governor Wes Moore sign an executive order to protect gender-affirming healthcare in Maryland, building on You know, I think his desire and dedication to safeguard the rights of the LGBTQIA community. The order will protect those seeking, receiving, providing gender affirming care in the state from attempts at legal punishment by other states. So let's talk about these wins. I feel like, you know, we're going to have a lot of really difficult things to discuss, but I like starting on a wins note, because to me that says there may be a lot of room for improvement, but there's also a lot of opportunity. Any thoughts?
You know, absolutely. I think the executive order that the governor recently signed needs to be codified. I think that will be the actual big win, but it is progress moving forward. I think it also speaks to the work that the Trans Advocacy Coalition has been able to do here in Maryland, about being able to advocate for their issues, bring face to the community, and really be able to just organize folks in a way where their issues are being advanced because they're being understood. And that's, I think, progress. I think, too, Maryland has been able to show that we are opposite of the rest of the country. So while the rest of the country and our state legislatures and governors are moving towards bigoted and hateful, targeted language, we in Maryland are saying we are a welcoming, safe, and you know, protective community for all of our folks. And I think that contrast is really key, especially when you talk about the economics of bringing people to your state, about wanting to build a workforce and an economy for our state that really moves us forward. We need to be as inclusive as possible of all of us. And that includes the LGBTQ community, that includes the immigrant community, that includes everyone. And so I think a lot of these wins speak to where Maryland will be in the future.
No, I think that's a great question, and I'm happy that we're starting on a positive note. I just want to put us in the context for a second of both the history and the timeline, right, of where we've been as a state, and also what's happening nationally. So, you know, you mentioned the Stonewall riots earlier, 1969. 1973 here in Maryland, Maryland becomes the first state in the country to ban same-sex marriage. Maryland, right? 1973. That, you know, it might feel like a while ago, but it's not. And not just because of the internal maneuvering of the leaders in the legislature, but because of the popular support and the pressure from the communities, right? From people here across the state of Maryland. Maryland then becomes the first state in 2012 to legalize same-sex marriage by referenda, right? So that, I think, shows you the progress over the course of a generation that we can make. And then the context of where we're at nationally. I was with Representative Zoe Zephyr last night from Montana, who is, I believe, the first out transgender member of the Montana State House. And she was essentially ousted from the state legislature there because of because she had condemned her colleagues when they were seeking to ban gender affirming care in the state of Montana, which we know would have lethal consequences for trans kids in America, or for trans kids in that case in particular in Montana. And you compare that to what we're seeing, and look, that is, she has been a warrior and has been pushing back, and it was really an honor to meet her. But you compare that to what you're seeing here in the state of Maryland, where we have a growing number of proud, openly LGBTQ, including Ashanti and I, members of the legislature who are there fighting vocally every single day and getting big wins. So look, I am just really proud to be a Marylander right now.
So this is, you know, it's great that we have these protections, right? And the beginning of what I think is some, how shall we say, I think there's coalescence actually around issues, and I actually see Maryland as a bright line against hate and welcoming folks from all over, right? Like I started to say at the beginning, diversity, I think, is part of what makes this state great. It's part of the reason I chose to come to Maryland, because I saw how proactive the legislature was. I just found that fascinating. I've been in this business a long time, probably longer than you two have been around. So let's talk a little bit about non-discrimination, though, in Maryland. What is still missing? What can we focus on? Because you have a number of advocates on this call, right? And it's an opportunity to share with other nonprofits in the area. Like, what could we focus on to protect our LGBTQIA friends and families and neighbors from discrimination? Are there things bubbling up in session right now that we should be paying attention to?
You know,
Oh,
go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead. Oh, so I was going to echo Delegate Martinez's comments earlier on the need for us to codify the executive order and also recognize quickly what that means, right? I was out in Western Maryland the other day at a new women's health center that's opened up there that is not only providing access to reproductive health care, which is critical in that part of the state, and also providing access to people in neighboring states, right? You look at West Virginia where the legislature there has criminalized abortion. They were also providing access to gender affirming care. And because of the executive order and because of the protections that we have now in Maryland, not just for Marylanders seeking gender affirming care, but also for people from other states that need to come to this state to seek that care, that is really, really critical, especially when you look at the map and see how many people are going to have to come to our state, both for reproductive health care and for gender affirming health care. We know that both of those are forms of health care. Health care is a human right. Health care is life-saving and should be accessible to all. I believe that with my whole being. Look, in terms of protections that we still need, I know we've mentioned protections around credit lending, non-married second parent adoption. I also think we need, as much as we need to keep moving forward on state solutions to this, I also think we need a federal solution. The Equality Act has been in Congress for way too long, and we're still waiting for it to be passed, but that would be sweeping protections nationwide, covering people in every corner of this country, making sure that they have non-discrimination protections in housing, in lending, in employment, right? All these critical areas that we need that protection.
Delegate Martinez, any thoughts?
I just want to echo what Delegate Vogel said in terms of, Maryland has done a lot, and we have been a leader nationally on a lot of these particular issues because we do understand why it's important to protect folks. We do understand why it's important to make sure that people feel safe, but we can only do so much as one state. And so we need a federal solution. We need the Congress to do their job, to pass the Equality Act, to move forward on pieces of legislation that will ultimately codify in law nationally what we are already doing here in Maryland. I think too, when people ask me questions around what can we do more for this community or what are LGBTQ folks looking for, they're looking for greater access to healthcare. They're looking for affordable housing. They're looking for transportation and safe streets, right? They're looking for clean air and water. They're looking for parks and recreation near their homes. They're looking for retail that serves them directly. They're looking for cost savings and making sure they're protected against price gouging, just like everybody else. And so when we advance policies for working families, we're ultimately advancing policies for LGBTQ folks, for immigrant communities, for everyone. And I think that is what our focus should be. And something I've been really, really proud of is the work that we've been able to do so far in the General Assembly.
You mentioned, you brought up the issues of, I think Delegate Vogel, you brought up the issues of adoption and credit lending and those kinds of things. How important is that for our LGBTQ community?
I think generally any
well,
issue,
for all of us, yeah.
any issue of discrimination holds all of us back as a state, especially when it comes to issues like credit lending, right? That's about economic opportunity. Right. And we want, I want to maximize our economic prosperity as a state. And if there are elements of discrimination that hold people back from reaching their full potential, they also hold our economy back from reaching our full potential. So I don't think it's only discriminatory. I also think it's bad economic policy. So that's something that I pledge to take a look at in following legislative sessions and see what we can do on that front.
Any thoughts, Delegate Martinez?
I agree. I mean, I think that's something that we should be solely focused on, is how to reduce harm with policy. That's really the framework that I try to move on any policy position is how can this help people? How can we move our communities forward? And so any proposals or ideas, I know there's a lot of policy minds on the call. I'm all ears. I think a good idea is a good idea no matter where it comes from. And I think community conversation is how we build towards progress.
You know, I concur. And I also concur that this is about economic policy, right? And keeping the state healthy as well, because, you know, if people have access to, you know, making a decent wage and taking care of their funds and investing in a home and all those things, assuming that we have sufficient affordable housing, of course, no pressure, gentlemen. I think, you know, it benefits all of us, right? All of us is all of us, like I said. But there's still a number of things that are happening, and especially around mental health. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, and access to mental health resources. So there's kind of two discussions happening. One is the gun violence, and one is the mental health discussion. Gun violence and hate crimes, and how they're, you know, intertwined. Again, this is affecting all of our communities: African American communities, Latino communities, trans communities. It's like everybody is targeted in one way or the other. And I remember when I lived in DC, I lived in DC for almost 20 years. And we would see, from the time I arrived, almost every other day, you mentioned trans women earlier, being beaten and murdered. And it was like, it was only in the smaller local papers that were like community based. You didn't really see it too much in the Washington Post, but it was horrible. And then we're seeing rise in hate crimes. From 2020 to 2021, there was hate crimes apparently rose by 11%. This is from the FBI's annual reports. And where we saw the rise, and again, because of COVID and the perception that the pandemic started in China, but Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Sikhs were really targeted, but so were the LGBTQ community. Really, those two communities saw the highest increases in hate crimes. And then in Maryland, what we saw was in 2018, if you looked at the hate bias report that gets published annually by the state police, there were 23 of the verified 100 incidents reported to law enforcement in 2018 were related to the LGBTQ community, and nearly 60% against communities of color. In 2021, those numbers rose to 59 of the 100 or so incidents related to gender identity and sexual orientation, and 68.7% were committed against people of color. So not only were the numbers going up, so were the margins of pain. And you know, what can we do? There, you know, especially when we think about the gun violence more recently, I mentioned Annapolis had a mass shooting. A U.S. Army veteran was angry at his neighbor who was having a graduation party, and he came on. There's a lot to discuss. It's under investigation. I don't know, but it affects us. It impacts us directly. And the shot 3 people. One of them, he repeatedly shot at it with a semi-automatic gun. And then he ran back into his house, and he proceeded to grab a rifle and just shoot across the crowd. So 3 people dead, 3 people injured. This is close to home. We have these strong laws. We have good hate crime, fairly decent hate crime laws, and even a lot of prevention. Where are we at? Why is this still happening? From your perspectives, I know you don't have a crystal ball. I'm sorry. It's a big question.
No. But it's a question I think we all are asking ourselves, right? I think ultimately we know that we have to do everything we can to try to combat against gun violence. This is an issue that is plaguing all of our communities across the state. In particular here in Prince George's County, the incident that you were speaking about in Anne Arundel is still very much under investigation. And there's a lot that we will learn after that investigation is concluded. So I don't want to speak too much on that particular situation because it is ongoing. But I will say here in Prince George's County, I keep track of when there's mass shootings or particularly shootings that involve our children and our youth. And there is a huge uptick in terms of violent crime. One, we got to figure out how these guns are getting into our communities. I know a few years ago, the legislature worked on a ghost gun bill, banning the manufacturing and creation of ghost guns without proper licensing and labeling. But we also have to figure out how these guns are getting in the hands of children. There is clearly an organized effort to put these guns in particular communities and activate individuals who are willing to use them. And so I think we have to be very strategic in how we engage our young folks and how we engage everyone and be able to provide real resources, real conflict resolution tools. Don't think we speak enough as community and are having really honest conversations about how we can move through disputes and that a gun is not ever the first or second or third response in a lot of these situations. I think the pandemic has also separated us in ways where we don't necessarily see the humanity in all of us. And so a lot of what I try to do is be out in the community, engage with folks, get people to come out, share information. I try to be a resource as much as possible because right now everyone needs that lifeline. And so it's something that is an ongoing issue. It's something that we're always going to tackle. And I don't know if there's a piece of legislation that's going to be the silver bullet, but I do know as we continue to fight against these crimes, as we continue to fight against, the hate that we're seeing in our communities, we have to understand that it's a continual fight. And it's worth fighting for. Right.
Delegate Vogel.
Okay, so there's a lot here, so I'm going to try to
unpack. Yeah, there's a lot to
unpack. Well, look, first of all, I didn't know that it was a semi-automatic weapon that was used in that shooting in Annapolis.
It was a gun.
It was okay. No, but look, I think generally, right, there are steps that we can take. Again, federally. I was reading the other day that the majority of guns used in Maryland. Acts of gun violence are coming in from out of state. So this, we have done so much here in Maryland to advance progress on that front and keep Marylanders safer. But if you have guns coming in from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, right, we're still going to have a problem. So we need a federal solution to gun violence. We need an assault weapons ban in the United States. It's past time for us to have that type of gun safety legislation nationally. I'll talk about what we've done, what I've led on here in Maryland, both on the mental health front and on the hate crimes front. On the mental health front, I think we have an issue across the board with every demographic when it comes to mental health. I think we have a unique crisis when it comes to our children. And I spend as much time as possible meeting with school administrators, educators, students, to hear from them directly what the challenges are that they're seeing. I visited Gaithersburg High School the other day. That's part of my district. I was walking down the hallway with the principal, and I saw this young man who was kind of hanging his head, and I was like, oh God, like what's wrong? And the principal said that student lost his best friend to an act of gun violence this weekend. Right. And that's the reality. And that is not unique in our schools right now. The crisis that we're seeing when it comes to the rise in anxiety, depression, and suicidality, what we're seeing when it comes to the rise in violence, the rise in addiction, right? It is a really, really serious problem facing our youth. So I introduced legislation because I recognize that, if we're going to invest in mental health in our schools, we can't do it if we don't have the workforce. So I sponsored legislation to expand an existing debt forgiveness program, a student debt forgiveness program, to include mental health professionals, school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors. And through the legislative process, we ended up with $5 million to now forgive, in addition to classroom teachers, right, the mental health, the debt, the student debt of of mental health professionals working in our public schools. And the point of that is this, right? If you are working in our public schools right now as a mental health professional, and you work there for at least 2 years, you can get up to $30,000 of debt forgiveness. If you are in another state and you come work in a Maryland public school for at least 2 years, you can get up to $30,000 of debt forgiveness, right? So I think we're already going to see, hopefully through this legislation and through other pieces of legislation, a rise in the number of mental health professionals working on the front lines. But this is really just the beginning, right? We have to address the issues of access to mental health care in our Latino community, which is a hurdle for so many in the rural parts of our state, and also address the stigma of mental health, which continues to hold so many back from seeking mental health care. On the hate crimes front, I'll try to be quick. I sponsored legislation to turn what was an informal task force in the Attorney General's office into a permanent commission on hate crime prevention and response. And we did a few things in the process of doing that, right? We added some groups, added a group representing the LGBTQIA community, added a group representing the Asian American community, and added a group and made sure, I think there were already groups representing the Sikh community, which I know you mentioned, representing the immigrant community. And what we've essentially built is a commission of, I believe it's 26 members representing all these communities that are most impacted by the rise in hate crimes. We've provided them with permanent funding to hire and keep on an assistant attorney general working with this group directly, working on policy, working on implementing the recommendations of this group. And I've issued, within the legislation, a mandatory report required, I believe, by next year to the legislature and to every government and to our government agencies, directing us with what these communities that are most impacted by the rise in hate crimes feel like we need to do in policy and legislation to address the surge in hate crime. So this is one important step forward, but I agree with my colleague, Delegate Martinez, that there is so much more that we need to do on gun violence, on mental health, and on hate crimes.
I'm just going to make an observation. What the observation being that what I'm hearing from you both is it's really about connecting the dots, right? We're connecting the dots of all the available resources. We're figuring out what's out there, assessing it, evaluating it, and then looking at where the gaps are, but also what is working well. That sounds loud and clear. I love the idea of making the commission something bigger and more substantive with a report and everything else. The issue is, will we read our reports, right? So many of our reports end up sitting on these shelves. I read them too. But I did a lot of research getting ready for this. And one of the things, and there was a caveat of caution that I kept sort of picking up on the mental health front and the connectedness to gun violence. Several centers, including the Johns Hopkins Center on Gun Violence, state very clearly only 4% of mass shootings are due to mental health challenges. And I think part of the challenge is not, respecting both sides, both issues, while at the same time being conscious that we don't want to perjudicar, como se dice, we don't want to injure or damage the reputation of a person with mental health, like they're all going to be suspect of being potential criminals. I don't think that's right. And unfortunately, our society, with the way we read media sometimes, that comes out that way, right? So that was also something I was hearing. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how we should talk about it? Maybe I know I didn't put that in your pre-questionnaire, but as I was listening to it, really strikes me that it might be worth disaggregating a little bit on that point.
Look, we definitely have a mental health care crisis in our state and in our country right now. We are not the only country in the world that has a challenge with mental health. Right. We stand out amongst every developed nation in the world when it comes to gun violence, right? The leading cause of death for children in the United States of America is gun violence, right? This is a uniquely American problem, and the problem is the guns, right? So we need to continue investing in mental health care, and we need to reduce the stigma. We also have to get dangerous guns off our streets and keep people that shouldn't have access to guns from having these guns. But I will note one other thing that I think is really important to mention as we're talking about the intersection of these two issues, which is the number of suicides that we have using
in our communities.
guns. Yeah,
All of our communities.
and the issue is that the guns are used in a very small number of suicides, but the overwhelming majority of suicide deaths are suicides with guns, because we know that a suicide attempt becomes far more likely to end in death if a gun is involved. So again, we need to get guns off our streets and take the steps necessary to push forward on gun safety.
Delegate Martinez.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think there is a need to be cautious when we talk about mental health and its intersection with gun violence. There are thousands of Marylanders who have mental health issues and are navigating through violence or are seeking care without having to go towards violence. And so I think it's really important that when we frame issues around violence, we understand oftentimes it's people making poor choices who are given false choices to begin with, right? Or given opportunity to cause crime, right? And so we've got to think about how do we prevent those opportunities from being in the forefront in the first place. But we also have to be honest about the choices people are given, right? If my choice is I have to rob someone or starve, right? Either one of those things is horrible. And so we as a state government have to be honest about the choices a lot of our people are having to make and the impacts that poverty has on people's decision-making, the impact that lack of public policy has on people's decision-making, the lack of planning, the lack of, so many things that government can fail at. I really do see government as a tool to help advance communities. And so how are we utilizing that tool and what choices are we providing people? And are they having to seek out assistance and care and their needs on their own with their own needs? But I also think there's a way that we have to educate our folks on how to resolve conflict. And part of that is removing the guns from the situation. And so I'm really encouraged. There's a group actually that does a lot of work in both Prince George's and DC called Guns Down Friday. Joanna Handy is the administrator of that program. She's working with a lot of nonprofits in the area to help advance just conflict resolution activities for our youth and kids. I mean, there's so much work that we could be investing in and doing. And I think Maryland can be a leader in it. And so that's where I think our focus should be. But I am really cautious about linking the mental health crisis directly to the gun violence, because I think they are very separate issues that deserve equal amount of attention.
I want to invite Veronica Cool. She put a set of questions, and of course I'm starting to cough, to ask her questions, but also she'll do her magic. Sorry, I gotta stop.
Gracias, Gabriela. Thank you all. Thank you, gentlemen. Really, really appreciate the candor in addressing some very, very delicate matters. But my question, if you guys can read it in the chat, I'll just vocalize it. I know our youth, I said this before we opened up the discussion, it's very difficult to be different. And, as Latinos, we all look different, we sound different, and throw in the different generations, throw in that I may be Dominican and you're, Salvadorian, throw in that I'm one of, 3 and you're one of 1 or 1 of 10. My parents are documented or undocumented. I speak English, accented, not accented, obviously throw it all in. Somos diferentes, and it's hard. Throw in identity, it's harder. And then throw in your geography. If you're in a rural setting, if you're in a very diverse setting. So I'm eager to hear from the audience, because this is a group discussion. I know if it's virtual, then obviously we have fantastic guests, but I'd love to hear in the chat what's happening in our community. How are our youth in particular handling that Latinidad based on your geography? There was a lot of chatter, there's a lot of discussion around mental health. How are our kids handling being Latino and also their definitions of who they are. And then I also want to open up the conversation to our guests. You know, what best practices, what advice do you have? Because I worry between the pandemic, between this digital environment we're in, that we've regressed. We did have progress with Obama, you know, we did allow for love to be love, but then we lost a lot of that. So my biggest concern is, where are we today? Do our kids feel that they could be who they are 1,000%? Seeing you guys, I feel so hopeful, ¿verdad? But, you know, we're going to be in 10 years. Are we really going to be innovatively, you know, advancing economy? Are we going to be able to hold our own in a global economy? Because you can't make innovation. We can't make real money. We can't claim the world's patents if you at home are not thriving. People don't understand economy and innovation. It doesn't come from a place of discomfort. Oh. So curious to just hear what the audience and attendees are thinking, and would just love to hear from both of you, your thoughts on that. Lo puse nervioso, no.
Well, I'll jump in. You know, I have the blessing of having a very supportive family. You know, I came out at 13, partly because I knew who I was, and we have a really strict, like, no lying policy in this house. Ooh. And I just felt very much comfortable and was given the space to be honest. Now, it was a hard conversation. It's not like it was just like, okay, and we went on about our day. It was a lot of conversations. We sought, you know, professional help. We had therapy. We talked through what those issues were and got the assistance that we needed to be able to have the language to talk about what it was that I was feeling and who I am and how to shape my identity. And what did I really mean saying I was gay? And just really taking the time to do that. But that's a luxury. I really realize that's a privilege. Not everybody has the family that has the means to do something of that nature, or even the know-how. And so I think being examples of to be out, I think is really important. You know, growing up, I didn't have a me to look at in politics. You know, a lot of the people that I knew that were professional and gay were friends of my mom's. They weren't necessarily people I would see in the media or see in the fields that I wanted to pursue. Not until recently, we just got our first openly gay members of Congress of color with Richie Torres and Mondaire Jones. And so there's a lot of progress that still needs to be done in terms of just welcoming and inclusive our communities. But I think with this Generation Z, I like to say I'm a zillennial. Being that I'm 27, I'm like at that cusp where, like, I'm not quite Gen Z, but I'm like the bottom of the millennials. So as a zillennial, I got a vantage point of both. And you know, being in this weird space, I really do see that there is a difference. I think the folks coming up are a lot bolder, are a lot more honest, are a lot more comfortable with the nuances of being a person. They embrace the spectrum of who we are. They're not really set in the binary, right? I think for so long we were always put in these boxes, but this newer generation is very fluid. And I think as we look forward to the future, there's going to be a lot more questions about, well, what do you mean by that? Or what is this, that? Because the newer generation is not accepting labels. They are just existing. And that is enough. So.
Do you feel that that's the age versus the Latinidad piece? Do you think the fact that the younger generation versus the Black and brown is more open? I'm just super, super curious, because as older folks, right? Look, I'm claiming it, guys. I'm claiming it. I'm going to break down and claim that I'm older. That's going to help us message you all. Like if we're moving in any direction, whether voting, whether getting out and engaging for any function, right? Lo que sea, gun violence, voting. It's important to know what are your buttons, like what and how do we engage you? So do you think the age or the Latinidad, the ethnicity piece is more of a button for you?
That's a good question. That's something I would have to actually think about in terms of the entire community. But for me, I think I definitely identify more with kind of the generational things. Being that I grew up in a space that everyone was a little different. In
Yeah.
Prince George's County, we're very diverse. Like I grew up going to school with folks from every single country in Latin America you can think of, but we were sitting in classrooms with people from, African countries and Caribbean countries as well. And so
Mhm.
everyone had a little spice or a little difference to them that I think is very unique for Maryland, or really Prince George's County, I can speak for. And because of those differences, we all kind of just embraced each other because we knew we were coming from different spaces.
Interesting.
But that's just my experience. I would love to hear Joe, as he actually is
I would love it.
the Gen Z
Delegate
on the
Vogel.
call.
Well, as the Gen Zer here, okay.
Selenium.
Right.
No, Zillennial's a great term. Look, I do want to, and I think Ashanti has done such a beautiful job touching on his personal story and the role of family and community and all of this. I want to bring it back to the politics for a second and build on something that he was saying when it comes to having that representation and being able to see yourself in our leaders. I didn't grow up that long ago. I'm still growing up in a lot of ways. But growing up, we didn't have role models like this in politics or in media or in public life. I mean, you had some, but I think we really are that new frontier. And I think what's so important about the role that Ashanti and I play in government is not only, and we're coming up with those solutions. We're advancing those policy solutions. So it's not an and or, right. It's an and, right. We are passing the legislation that we need, and also providing really necessary representation to so many about not, with me personally, right. And in the legislature, right, there's that perspective and that representation that I bring. I'm a candidate for Congress now in the central and western part of our state. I'd be the first Latino ever elected to Congress from the state of Maryland, and the first openly LGBTQ plus person ever elected to Congress from the state of Maryland. And those identities, when I'm out there in the community,
And
right,
the youngest.
in every part of the district, people are having the conversations with me, knowing who I am and knowing the perspective that I bring, and we can connect. So I think what's so important is for us to recognize the role that diverse leaders that bring this representation have in our communities, and elect more of them and support more of them to make sure that everyone has someone that they can look to and feel represented.
Wow, those are such powerful answers. I love it. I love the energy and the focus you both have on doing, like, just opening doors. And what were you saying about broken glass? Getting someone's gonna have to come in there with the broom. So there's two comments in the chat that I want to raise, just because we did ask. So I'm in Baltimore City and work with children on IEP in the schools and at DJS. And I personally feel like our children need more trauma-informed care. They're dealing with so much. And then another one from Western Maryland. It says, my nonprofit works within Allegheny, I'm probably mispronounced that, Garrett and Washington counties. For the two most western regions, there is not much informed care for LGBTQIA individuals. We are only now being able to create spaces for our community, but those spaces are being targeted. Not only that, we are predominantly white. I was wondering how we could combat this fear within these rural regions. So that raises the rural issue that you also brought up, Veronica. What do you guys say? Oh, here's another one. Hi, Michael. I see this is a lot, and I know that there are pockets. Oh, it's a response. There are pockets in Western Maryland that are working so hard for progress. I am heartbroken to hear they are being targeted. I think conversations and connections are key. The more it becomes personal and the fears, the more we can address the fears, and the human aspect comes into play. It will get better. Maybe I'm just optimistic. I'm with you on the optimism. But I've been to so many Pride festivals and events across the state in the last year, and truly feels that dialogue helps. How do you respond to those? Do you agree on trauma-informed care? I imagine you must, but also on, not to put words in your mouth, but also on this idea of dialogue.
Yeah, look, Michael, we're gonna have a conversation about this in person in Western Maryland. We're gonna get together and talk more. But I think that the bottom line here is, well, twofold. One, we have to make the investments in trauma-informed care. We also have to stop we have to stop building on all the trauma, right? And take the necessary actions to make people feel accepted, welcome, safe, and to really advance the policies that we need to make people feel safer. But not all of this can be done through government, right? It really is on our community to build these accepting spaces. And when we talk about Western Maryland, one of the largest, most beautiful pride events that I've been to in my life was in Cumberland, Maryland. And that was a community coming together in coalition. And it wasn't just the LGBTQ plus community there. It was the Latino community there. It was the local NAACP chapter, everyone coming together and saying, we are going to celebrate our community, right? Everyone in our community. And that's what we need to continue building to make sure everyone feels accepted and loved in our state.
Go ahead.
Just to touch on the educators in the room, thank you for the work that you do, particularly with working with some of our most vulnerable children, the ones that need IEPs, the folks that need additional care and additional touch. Thank you for that. And in terms of trauma-informed care, it is so needed in a lot of our schools. What really impacted me, what really makes me so passionate is for the personal aspect of this, right? I've lost several friends to gun violence senselessly. But this past year, I went to Jay Agnew's funeral. He was a 13-year-old boy that was shot in the head while raking leaves in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Seeing that baby in a casket is tough. And so I think we all have been impacted by gun violence and ultimately need to figure out how to deal with this trauma. But ultimately, as Joe said, stop that trauma. I mean, it's tough seeing a 13-year-old in a casket. And that's the reality that's facing a lot of our families. But they still have to do what they have to do. They still got to pay the rent. They still got to put food on the table. They still got to get good grades. They still got to go to school. And we don't sit and really talk about these things and really understand the impacts. But we're all impacted. And so we're worth fighting for.
Oh, beautiful. I'm going to hand it over to Veronica to wrap up.
Yeah, no. Thank you. I know we're a little bit over. I'll recap a couple of things I saw in the chat. Lola, my friend, just because you're not a Latina does not make you important. I'll clarify that Maryland Latinos Unidos is for Latinos and allies. All of these issues do not get resolved in advance alone. We all work together. So brothers and sisters, hermanos y hermanas, it's about partnership and collaboration. So all of our issues are collaborative and we are all important. To our valued guests, gentlemen, thank you for joining us and sharing of your thoughts. Thank you for fighting these fights perpetually. Thank you for stepping up and making your life a perpetual battle. I don't know many people that will live perpetually at risk. And I don't think people understand that. I often think about the fact that in some places you couldn't hold the hand of the person you love without being arrested or attacked. Yeah. So just for a moment, think about that. I can hold my husband's hand. I can kiss my husband at any time. And people look at me and go, oh, how lovely. Oh, mira qué lindo. And it's beautiful. And in some places, that's not welcome for our guest. So the fact that they not only are perpetually at risk, and they're showing our children and the future fighting perpetually over and over, every time they go somewhere, they're at risk, even in Maryland. So that takes courage. So not only are they Latino, they look physically different, they sound different, they stand for different things, and some people that may be a little bit backwards, a little bit maybe not informed are. So I commend them and I thank them for always carrying the flag, not just a pride flag, but this is the people flag, the human flag. So I thank them for representing us. I thank them for taking a career that fights, that addresses humanity for us. And just so you know, gentlemen, Maryland Latinos Unidos, and I know everyone that's in this room, virtual room, is here to support you. So whenever you need something, whenever you need a letter signed, whenever you need a testimony, whenever you need foot soldiers, de verdad, we're here for you. So don't think you're alone. We don't want to let you fight alone. So you are the face. Thank you. Pero you're not alone. So I can't even, you're young, ¿verdad? So it's commendable to me that you've chosen this life, and we are so grateful. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Gabriela, thank you once again for being so timely in educating our community with this content and bringing it together. So un abrazote and happy Pride Month, everybody. Happy Immigration Heritage Month también.
Yeah, right. And thank you, everybody. We try not to end over, but we have. We thank you all for participating with us and joining with us. We look forward to our next conversation. And just to echo what Veronica said, I'm MLU is here to support you, and we convene, we converse, we cultivate ideas, and we collaborate. And that's Juntos Podemos Más. Those are our mottos, but we mean it. Like, we actually try to figure out how to do it. We're organizers at heart.
Así es.
Any final words, gentlemen?
I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity. It's always great to gather and be able to fellowship, but also share ideas and talk about the progress that our state has to make, that is also made. And so I just thank you guys for having this space, for being so courageous and making sure to hear all of us.
Yes, you delegates are like cats.
To do, but you guys do it. You guys do it so flawlessly. You make it easy, look easy at least. So I want to just thank you guys for this opportunity.
And I will just very quickly add that I know a lot of the issues that we touched on today were pretty dark and scary, right?
A little bit.
The challenges are real. But I wouldn't be doing this work, and I don't think Delegate Martinez would be doing this work. I don't think any of you would be on here if you didn't feel hopeful for what the future holds for all of us, for our state, for our country, for everyone that calls this place home. So we're going to keep working, we're going to keep fighting, and I believe, really from the bottom of my heart, that better days are ahead for all of us. So let's keep working.
Well, thank you for lifting us all up. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us for the People's Policy Series, our monthly event. We'll let you know soon what's going on in July, but have a great rest of your week and weekend.